So that is part of what we expect today. When it comes to trying to fortify among those voters in the suburban areas, one thing that the Harris-Walz campaign points out is among all the types of voter blocks, those voters who live in the suburbs who are perhaps a bit more mature, they've got mortgages to pay, they've got kids in school, they're concerned about a whole range of issues, that they are reliable voters. They don't sit home typically. And so they want to make sure they are trying to convert any of the voters who might have been interested in Nikki Haley, for example, as a Republican, those disaffected Republicans, as well as shoring up the Democratic base and turnout. And certainly Barack Obama has been talking to African-American men and men broadly, because, of course, we know there is a gender gap in this race that has been borne out by polling, showing that Donald Trump is more effective among men and Kamala Harris among women. Harris, of course, also strong among college-educated voters. This, of course, is a college town as well. Jose?
Thank you, Kelly. And in Basel, we have new NBC reporting that some Democrats are concerned about the Harris campaign's ability to win what's called the blue wall of swing states. The vice president needs to win an election. A senior campaign official telling NBC News, quote, there has been a thought that maybe Michigan or Wisconsin will fall off, and stressed that the bigger concern is over Michigan. Also, how critical are these states?
Well, they're very critical, but I would also acknowledge that because the vice president has raised tremendous amounts of money, over $1 billion or more, that she has multiple paths to victory that they probably did not have back in the summer. But that doesn't mean they're not going to contest everywhere. You know, when I talk to a lot of voters, when I talk to a lot of organizers, particularly over the last few days, they've got busloads and busloads of volunteers going into these states, Pennsylvania in particular, but also out into the Midwest. And a lot of those volunteers, part of the conversation isn't just about door knocking and telling people to get out to vote. It's also about giving them talking points to be able to really explain with some detail why it's important to vote for the Harris campaign. So there's in my experience, in my almost 30-year experience in this business, there is a lot more, granularity, there's a lot more detail, there's a lot more intentionality around not just where they're going to get out the vote, but what they're saying to voters when they get there. So I guess the overall message is there's no stone unturned, and they're contesting everywhere, and nothing is going to be sort of pushed off and slumped off and written off in this cycle.
You know, Basel, I've just been wondering about, and, you know, using your 30 years of experience, when is the point, or is there a point of super saturation, for example, on campaign ads? I was just speaking with someone this morning who was saying, I just can't stop getting ads, and I'm quite frankly tuning them out. Is there a super saturation period?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I have a lot of friends that sometimes will send me pictures of 30 to 40 mail pieces that they've gotten in a short period at the end of the cycle. And look, I think sometimes voters do get a little fatigued by so many commercials, so many text messages, because that's, you know, a certain change from when I started. Before it was mail, and it's still mail. People do still get a lot of that. So yeah, I mean, I do think there's fatigue, but ultimately what happens at the end of all of this is somebody going to your door and pulling you out and saying you got to vote, or you seeing somebody on the corner. Ultimately, that actually can make all the difference, because yeah, some people will throw out some of those mail pieces, but at least you know who that candidate is, and at least you know even a little bit about what that candidate stands for, and actually that's half the battle right there.
And Garrett, meanwhile, you're in Greensboro, where Trump is set to hold a rally tonight. He was campaigning there yesterday, too. Is the Trump campaign concerned about North Carolina?
Well, Jose, the Trump campaign never admits to being concerned about anything. In fact, it's part of their strategy to project strength everywhere and suggest that they will win in every state, and sort of invite people along for the ride for that. But their actions undercut that narrative. Donald Trump was supposed to be giving a speech tonight to the NRA in Georgia, but last week canceled that speech to add this rally here in Greensboro, only about 80 or 100 miles from his event last night. Now, part of the reason to do that is to capture early vote, which is well underway here in North Carolina. I'm at an early vote location right now, and you can't quite see, so I won't even try to show you, but just farther down, maybe 100 yards behind me, is the beginnings of the line for this Trump rally tonight. And so the opportunity exists for them to try to lock in some votes in a county that has been a bluer lean of late, but where this morning I found one perhaps a little bit shy. I read him as a Trump voter talking about the issues that will decide the election for him. Listen. But what issues are most important?
The economy and the problem with illegal immigration and the high crime.
Do you have confidence that this election will be fairly decided?
I sure hope so. I have some confidence, not 100%. I guess we'll see.
Jose, that last bit I think is so important, that we'll see. I have heard some confidence, some skepticism from voters of both parties that I've talked to in this state since we got here yesterday. The way in which Trump continues to lie about the 2020 election has been pervasive among voters in both parties. I think everybody's looking over their shoulder as they cast their ballots, be it now or on Election Day, to make sure things get counted and counted properly.
And Tara, meanwhile, NBC News is also reporting that the Harris campaign is feeling a little less bullish about victory in North Carolina. 4 people with knowledge tell NBC News that Hurricane Helene's destruction and the disinformation that followed could weigh against the Harris campaign. How much of an impact do you think this could have?
Well, in an election as close as this one is, it could have an impact. I mean, last time around, COVID had an impact, and people were upset about some of the rule changes for voting, and that created some of the chaos that the Trump campaign took advantage of after the election last time. This time, we're dealing with a natural disaster that, Trump is out there spreading misinformation. FEMA workers are being threatened. It doesn't give me confidence that we're going to have a smooth election in North Carolina, especially when it comes down to a few percentage points. I mean, that was the closest state that Biden lost in 2020. I do think, though, that North Carolina is still in play for Kamala Harris, and that, what's happening there just is it highlights really just how important it is that every vote counts, whether it's North Carolina, whether it's Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and even Georgia. We also need to be careful with the disinformation campaigns there, given that Mike Whatley, who's now the head of the RNC, was part of the election denying efforts by the Trump campaign, and he runs the RNC now. So there needs to be hypervigilance around that as well.
And Kelly, yesterday, Vice President Harris was joined on the campaign trail by former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. What does the campaign feel they're getting out of that?
Well, they certainly believe that Liz Cheney can speak to Republicans who are turned off by Donald Trump, independent voters, and she's been making the argument that there's time to have policy disagreements, to debate vigorously over different ways that government should act in our lives. But she said that can only happen when the underpinnings of a secure democracy are in place. So she talked about, unless that is secure, that you really can't have the debates about how to spend the government's money, what to do about Social Security. And so she said, from her view, Liz Cheney's view, she believes that Kamala Harris will be loyal to the Constitution, will act on the nation's interests and not her own interests. She made that argument. Then she also made one about cruelty. And she talked about the fact that Donald Trump, in big and small ways, has given more license for cruelty, behaves in a way, in words and in actions, that leads to cruelty. And she very sharply made that observation, that in all sorts of ways in people's lives, who would they hire to work with their children? Who would they want to be a teacher in their schools? Who would they work with in a community organization? Would they surround themselves with someone who speaks and acts in ways that she deems to be cruel? She said, no, you wouldn't. And so he should not be president of the United States. So she made very forceful arguments to try to appeal to voters who probably their whole lives have thought of themselves as Republicans or maybe independents or not necessarily pro-Kamala Harris, but not wanting the things that she says would come from Donald Trump being back in office. Jose?
And Balzo, I mean, in just a couple of hours, former President Obama is going to join Governor Walz on the campaign trail in Madison. What does he bring to the campaign?
To this day, is still the Democratic Party's best spokesperson, the most gifted orator, and can make the case against Donald Trump in no better way than anybody else, except maybe for Michelle Obama. So he's an incredible spokesperson, knows exactly what's at stake here, and the framing becomes really important, and particularly for those Midwestern voters, when you have Barack Obama, Liz Cheney, and a lot of the organized labor that Kamala Harris has at her back. I mean, it's an articulation of a campaign rationale that I don't think could be done any better in this cycle. And the one thing that I will also say, there are a lot of African American voters in those states. And what I think Barack Obama has really been able to do is do something that I've just thought about very early on, which is, as a black man, what does this race mean to you? What does it mean that this incredibly qualified African-American woman is being attacked by so unqualified a white male in this cycle? As a black man, what are you going to step up and do? And that's the kind of charge that I think he can bring to a great many voters in this cycle.
Kelly O'Donnell, Garrett Hake, Tara Sutt-Mayer, and Basil Smikle, thank you all so very much. Really appreciate it. And happening now, Donald Trump is meeting with Latino leaders in Miami. We are monitoring that. We'll bring you any news as we get it. But up next, new details about the possible ceasefire deal that Israel is now considering. Plus, how the Harris campaign is making a last-minute pitch to Latino voters. And we've got breaking news. Abercrombie's former CEO arrested on sex trafficking charges. We're back in 90 seconds. We're watching Jose Díaz-Balart reports on MSNBC.
Introducing Allison's Black Psoriasis. She thinks her flaky gray patches are all people see.
Otezla is the #1 prescribed pill to treat plaque psoriasis. Over here. Otezla can help you get clearer skin and reduce itching and flaking with no routine blood tests required. Doctors have been prescribing Otezla for over a decade. Otezla is also approved to treat psoriatic arthritis. Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Serious allergic reactions can happen. Otezla may cause severe diarrhea, nausea, or vomiting. Some people taking Otezla had depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss. Upper respiratory tract infection and headache may occur.
With clear skin, Girls' Day Out is a good day out. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla.
You usually have to be old to know that the hopeless can turn hopeful. And so when we look at our most hopeless problems in the world today, we should know that those problems aren't more hopeless than the Berlin Wall was. They aren't more hopeless than the Vietnam War was. Now, when you listen to an old man who has seen it all give his last speech to the United Nations, you might want to try listening to him the way I do, with an understanding of how he learned to be hopeful.
16 past the hour. Following some breaking news, the former CEO of fashion retailer Abercrombie & Fitch has been